Just hours before he was shown the door, the outgoing Navy Secretary laid bare the US Navy's glaring weaknesses in its fight with Iran. With today's ships struggling to hold the line against Iran, John Phelan turned to unveiling Washington's next big naval gamble. On paper, Trump-class warships are the future answer to Iran, but for now, they exist more in plans than in the waters of Hormuz. Even as the US Navy stumbles in Hormuz, Trump is busy selling his Golden Fleet vision as the fix for America's bruised sea power. The US Navy Secretary chose a striking farewell message, sharing a teaser clip of the new Trump-class warship as his final post on social media. In his post on X, John C. Phelan declared that the BBGX platform was designed and built for the fight ahead, signaling it as the spearhead of America's future sea power. Just hours after that message went live, the Pentagon announced that Phelan would be leaving his position as Navy Secretary, with his departure taking effect immediately. The US Navy has unveiled an eye-watering $377.5 billion budget proposal for fiscal year 2027, aimed at massively expanding its future fleet. Reports say the plan, released by the Department of the Navy, represents roughly a 23% increase over the previous year's funding levels, underscoring just how urgent leaders see the naval buildup. At the heart of the blueprint are the so-called Trump-class battleships, designated BBGX, which are being pitched as the answer to China's rapidly growing naval power. The documents openly reference the Chinese Navy's surge in shipbuilding and expanding global maritime influence as the key strategic driver for this next-generation fleet. Under the broader Golden Fleet initiative, the Navy ultimately envisions fielding between 20 and 25 new major warships over the long term. In its first phase, the program calls for the construction of 2 advanced capital ships, led by a new flagship to be named USS Defiant. However, the timeline is anything but immediate. The lead ship, USS Defiant, is only expected to begin construction in the early 2030s. When they finally sail, these warships are designed to be larger, faster, and more powerful than any previous generation of US naval vessels. The Trump-class hulls are expected to carry hypersonic missiles, high-energy laser weapons, and advanced railgun systems as part of their core arsenal. Navy officials have also confirmed that the BBGX line is a direct successor to the DDGX next-generation destroyer program, effectively moving from destroyer to battle cruiser-style firepower. As part of their strike package, the ships are planned to field nuclear-capable, sea-launched cruise missiles, dramatically expanding their reach and deterrent value. Navy leaders argue that, taken together, the program will deliver unprecedented firepower for the United States across multiple oceans and conflict zones. Beyond the headline battleships, the modernization push also includes an expansion of frigates and a range of support vessels, aimed at building a more balanced but heavily armed future fleet. Amid the ongoing Iran war and its mounting pressures, the Trump administration's top civilian official in the US Navy has suddenly announced his immediate exit from the position. The Pentagon, on April 22nd, officially announced that Navy Secretary John Phelan has left his high-profile position within the Department of Defense. A Pentagon spokesman confirmed that Phelan departed from his critical role as Navy Secretary with immediate effect, effective right away. Hung Cao, who previously served as the Navy Undersecretary in a key supporting role, will now step up to become the acting Navy Secretary. This sudden departure came just one day after Phelan had addressed the Navy's annual conference in Washington, D.C., catching many by surprise. Notably, Phelan hadn't served in the military himself or held any prior civilian leadership role in defense before taking this top Navy job. Phelan's unexpected departure came right after the ouster of several senior generals amid the US military's ongoing struggles in the Iran war. War Secretary Pete Hegseth fired the Army's top officer, General Randy George, from his command position on April 1st. 2 other top generals in the Army were also removed from their important positions as part of the recent shakeup. John Phelan, who served as the Secretary of the Navy in a top civilian leadership role, has now departed from his position amid recent turmoil. General Randy George, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff responsible for overall Army operations, was fired from his high-ranking command position. Major General William Green Jr., the Army's Chief of Chaplains overseeing spiritual and morale support, has been removed from his key leadership role. General David Hodden, Commanding General of the Army Transformation and Training Command focused on modernizing forces, was also ousted from his position. Phelan was a major donor to Trump's campaign and also held an advisory position in a non-profit organization. The non-profit, Spirit of America, supported the defense of Ukraine as well as the defense of Taiwan. The U.S. Navy Secretary's departure came amid the U.S. military's failing blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. On the very day Phelan's exit was announced, Iranian forces seized 2 Israel-linked ships in a bold escalation. On April 22, Iran released a video showing its naval forces seizing commercial vessels that it described as linked to Israel, increasing pressure in the Strait of Hormuz. The ships were accused of violating maritime regulations that Iran has imposed around the strait, according to a report by Iran International. The footage was described as the first video of this kind of enforcement operation since the war began on February 28, giving viewers a rare glimpse of Iran's new blockade-style posture. Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency reported that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, carried out the operation, underscoring its role in controlling the waterway. Amid the ongoing standoff with the United States, Iran claimed to have seized 2 ships and taken them to its shores, portraying the move as a test of its authority in the region. This marks the first confirmed instance of Iran formally detaining foreign-linked vessels amid its own blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, crossing a threshold in the naval confrontation. The IRGC also issued a strong warning alongside the operation, emphasizing that it will treat any attempt to interfere with its control of the strait as a serious provocation. The IRGC warned that any disruption to order and security in the Strait of Hormuz would cross a red line, indicating that further incidents could trigger a more escalatory response. Reflecting these tensions, Brent crude prices climbed above $100 per barrel for the first time in about 2 weeks, driven by growing concerns over supply disruptions. The rise is being linked to the dual effect of the American blockade on Iranian ports and Iran's parallel efforts to restrict certain shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Major economies are now drawing down strategic reserves and cutting consumption where possible in an attempt to manage the economic impact of the tightening energy squeeze. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps attacked a 3rd ship on April 22 in the Strait of Hormuz, Iranian media reported, escalating tensions in the strategic waterway. The attacked vessel was identified as the Euphoria, according to New News, Fars, and Mehr, which all reported the IRGC strike on the ship. Iranian reports said the Euphoria had become stranded on the Iranian coast, without elaborating on the exact circumstances or damage. The IRGC also separately attacked and seized 2 other vessels, MSC Francesca and the Epaminondas, in the same area. The Guard said that the violating ships Epaminondas and the Israel-linked MSC Francesca had endangered maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz. According to the IRGC, both ships were operating without the necessary permits and had tampered with their navigation systems, which it described as a threat to navigational safety. These incidents came just after Trump, on April 21, extended the truce with Iran but refused to lift the U.S. blockade around Hormuz, keeping naval pressure in place despite the attacks. The first Iranian reaction on April 22 to the U.S. ceasefire extension was sharply critical, with Tehran signaling that it views the move as more tactical than substantive. A senior advisor to the Speaker of Iran's parliament issued an outright dismissal of the U.S. decision, arguing that Washington should not portray the extension as a diplomatic concession. Mahdi Mohammadi, an aide to Iran's lead negotiator in the Pakistan-mediated talks, publicly warned the U.S. that the truce extension would not alter the underlying power dynamics. Mohammadi stated that the extension means nothing and stressed that it does not change the ground situation, where the U.S. blockade on Iranian ports remains in place. 34 Iran-linked tankers have bypassed the U.S. naval blockade around Hormuz, the Financial Times reported, citing tracking data from Vortexa. These vessels slipped through despite U.S. claims that the embargo has been a tremendous success, highlighting gaps in enforcement. The U.S. imposed a blockade on all ships entering or leaving Iranian coastal waters on April 13, as part of its wartime pressure campaign. On April 16, the embargo was expanded to cover Iran-linked ships globally, including so-called dark fleet tankers operating far from the Gulf. Nevertheless, 19 tankers tied to Iran exited the Persian Gulf through the blockade undeterred, according to the Vortexa-based analysis. At the same time, 15 tankers entered the Gulf from the Arabian Sea en route towards Iran, adding to the tally of successful transits. At least 6 outbound vessels were confirmed to be carrying Iranian crude shipments totaling about 10.7 million barrels. Based on typical discounts to Brent crude, that cargo volume was estimated to be worth roughly $910 million in revenue for Iran. One Iranian-flagged supertanker, the Dorina, exited the Gulf with its AIS transponder turned off, according to Vortexa's tracking data. Satellite data earlier showed the Dorina had conducted a ship-to-ship transfer near Malaysia in March, a common tactic used to disguise sanctioned oil's origin. Such ship-to-ship transfers are widely used by tankers carrying sanctioned crude to conceal where the oil was loaded and who ultimately receives it. U.S. sanctioned vessels, including the Merlikishan and Alicia, also entered the Gulf via the Gulf of Oman during this period, data showed. So far, the U.S. has detained one tanker in the Gulf of Oman and boarded another vessel in the Indo-Pacific as part of blockade enforcement. U.S. Central Command claims that naval forces have directed 28 vessels to turn back to Iranian ports after radio contact and interception orders. Despite agreeing on April 21 to extend the ceasefire with Iran, Trump has refused to lift the Hormuz blockade, keeping the maritime restrictions in place.